Greetings. My name is EShed Alston, a.k.a. EShed the Prophet. The reason I'm here is to give you some information based on God's truth. You know, a nation that falls out of God's truth or falls out of God's protection. 6 years ago, I made a similar statement in the first presentation of EShed the Prophet Speaks. And here I am, here 6 years from that date, to give you an update. To give you not only an update, but some information relative to the book, The Lamb's Book of Life, that was published in 2010 and written in 2009. I've blown up some of the pages so that it makes it a little easier for me to read. But these are pages that are contained in the book. For example, I'm going to read you some information from the book that will identify why I'm here 6 years later. Quote, "It is modern America's homosexual society, specifically that community, that has twisted the gospel and the laws of God and of man." That was referenced 6 years ago. What I'm here to explore is how is it that the Christian church was so, had such a lack of knowledge or lack of understanding of these biblical things which are clearly stated in the Bible, and that there's a difference between progressive society and decadence. A decadence is the earmark of decay, and decay is the earmark of death. Americans have become so enamored with the media that as Americans we have come to trust the media. What I'm here to tell you is over the last 6 years or longer, the media has been untrustworthy. Let me give you a couple of examples of just how the media has sold you something that just doesn't make sense. Bruce Jenner has 2 daughters. Bruce Jenner will forever have 2 daughters because he produced them with a female. Now, the media is telling you that this man is a woman because he's changed his name. I submit to you that changing his name does not make him anything other than what his 2 children call him, which is their father. Or Bruce Jenner is a man. There was a story that was out having to do with the killing of the 2 news reporters. I won't get into details in terms of the particulars, but there's one specific fact that the media left out. The media portrayed this individual, Vester Lee Flanagan, Bryce Williams, as a white reporter killed on live TV, racially motivated attack. Well, no, that's not true. Because if you do research, and I challenge you to research the information, what you'll discover is Bruce Williams, Vester Lee Flanagan, was a homosexual activist. He had homosexual postings, and yet when the media portrays him as a black terrorist, they don't reference him as a black homosexual terrorist. And that's part of the media's presentation of this perverse and abnormal behavior. Now, for me to say that now has some consequences, but if I said that in writing 6 years ago, referencing this Obama administration, then we're dealing with something a little bit different. For example, this was printed in 2010. It references the Obama nation. Now, that term Obama nation has a connotation because the King James Bible references the abomination with an A. What I submit to you is that the A and the O, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, identify time frames. And the time frames are referenced to the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verse 8. One of the things that I have found in my research is that the Christian church has has made an error of great importance. What I'm convinced, and what I think the Bible absolutely identified, is that we are dealing with overlaps. Chapter 1, chapter 5, and chapter 11 overlap. For example, chapter 1 of the book of Revelation, and I happen to have some references to the text, identify that Christ appears at the book of Revelation 1:5. Christ appears at the book of Revelation 1:5 with the statement, "And from Jesus Christ, who is faithful witness, and the first begotten of the dead, and the prince of the kings of the earth, unto him that loved us and washed us from sins in his own blood." Why is that important? Because a lot of ministries, including Arnold Murray's ministry, for example, teaches that he doesn't appear until the seventh trump. The only problem with his belief is that Christ himself disputes it. And so part of what we're dealing with in the final days of the Christian dialogue is statements that are being made by so-called Christian leaders that absolutely undermine what Christ said himself. So part of what I'm here for is to identify how America fell and how far America has fallen. I believe in using official sources. I believe in using sources that would be considered impeccable. For example, this is an old, worn U.S. Supreme Court docket entry, a certiorari document, meaning that I got on the U.S. Supreme Court docket a docket number 10164 and 12912. That's important because these two documents are American history. Let me read you some American history that you might not be aware of. This was briefed to the United States Supreme Court in 2010. This is a matter of certiorari record before the U.S. Supreme Court currently. Quote, questions presented. Is the U.S. Supreme Court a once great institution, currently a corrupt institution, and a decadent organization over the past 20 years? Question mark. Is the U.S. Supreme Court responsible for the fall of American culture over the past 20 years and currently? Question mark. Are the U.S. Supreme Court justices responsible for the decay of American culture in the same way the judges of Rome, Babylon, Sodom and Gomorrah ignored God and were absolutely responsible for the judgment of God on the cultures of their time and are responsible for the decline of our current final culture predicted in the Bible as that of the harvest of the ripe figs? That was printed 6 years ago. Now, why is that important? Going on 6 years ago. That's important because on June the 26th of 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court, on a first precedent, changed the law of America to a sodomy nation. But, audience, this was briefed in 2010, and you never heard about it, and it made it on the U.S. Supreme Court docket at docket number 10164. Another element of my claims that I'm making before you has to do with corruption. Corruption? Well, have you ever heard of Solyndra? I'm sure most of you have. But do you know that Solyndra had a precursor, if you will? And before Solyndra was Shepherd, which stood for Solar Hydro, Aquatic Power Plant, Aquatic Research and Development. And the reason why that nomenclature exists, because in the book that I published in 2010, it was contained in the back of the book as a new generation of solar hydro invention that ran on water and sunlight. And the specifications for Solyndra were very similar to what I submitted to the Department of Energy in 2010 that eventually became Solyndra. Now, what am I saying? This claim was verified in docket number 12912 that made its way to U.S. Supreme Court. The reason I'm putting this out here is because you, audience, should have heard about these things. These are official documented historical references that you never heard of because of the media suppression of the truth. We have to accept the fact that the media is not telling us the entire truth. The media is telling a slanted a homosexualized truth that isn't truth at all. So that's the input here, that we are a fallen nation. And the only question in my mind is how far we fall. When I was reviewing the book of Revelation, it revealed a lot of things, and one of the things it revealed in chapter 11 was the book of Revelation, chapter 11, verse 8. Chapter 11, verse 8 said, "And their dead bodies," the two witnesses, "shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified." Well, first of all, Christ was not crucified in Sodom or Egypt, so we know that can't be a reference to Christ. But the reference to Sodom and Egypt was what I found the most intriguing. Because if you consider the Sodom and Egypt reference, then that would be a modern consideration would be homosexuals and Pharaoh. And if we consider homosexual and Pharaoh, then we have to consider where in the world could that possibly be? A nation once great that is now a homosexual nation run by Pharaoh. Well now, interesting perspective that well, let me give you my analysis. It's us. It's the Obama nation of homosexuals and sodomy. Because under this administration, the Defense of Marriage Act was eliminated, and every other safeguard that has existed in law has been eliminated by this president. For the benefit of black culture? No. For the benefit of American society? No. For the benefit of a tiny fraction of Americans, the homosexual society in America. Let me make it clear. We're not dealing with a large segment of the population. We're dealing with a fraction of the population that is elevated to the status of a civil rights group. My question is, when we look at a civil rights group, what are the parameters for its acceptance? The idea that this is a civil rights group is based on, at this point, nebulous consideration. But let me read you what was written and what was published back in 2010. It is a true fact that God has condemned the existence and the practice and the active vocal stride, nevertheless doomed and damned world, and particularly the American homosexual equality movement has condemned itself to hell. Now, why would I say that? I would say that then, and I would reassert it now, because a hog, a dog, and a frog, a rat, a bat, and a cat can produce after their own kind. A male homosexual cannot produce another male homosexual. A female homosexual cannot produce another viable female homosexual. It is not natural, and it is not possible. So the variant then here is, this is the only civil rights group that exists that cannot produce after its own kind. The homosexuals are dependent on what? How are they propagated, and what is the method that they use to produce the next generation? And the answer is, they can't produce the next generation because they can't produce this generation. So part of my presentation here has to do with how this came to be and how we came to be where we're at. And so I would refer back to what I said back then. One of the things I said back then, I'm going to repeat for the record here. And this is what was said then, and I stand by it now. Quote, "Public disagreement with the policy and the acceptance therewith is the reason for the forced media focus, and forced perception of public acceptance, God forbid. God is the master of all. God forbid the American government adoption of this damned and perverse homosexual society. God forbid, Mr. President Obama, America and you cannot justifiably, reasonably, or intelligently oppose God or base a legitimate society or civil right on a perverse sex act, which is a private right and more correctly a private freedom of choice elevated to the status of a civil right, which it is not." That argument has never been part of the presentation of ideas because it was suppressed by the media for the last 6 years. I've sent a copy of my book to every media outlet that exists, that exists anywhere. In presenting this information, I'm just going to get a document here, and I just want to show you, just to give you some context. It's an old document, I will admit. It's the the national TV talk and interview interview shows. It is the Harbison's Guide, and any of you who are in the media know what the Harbison's Guide is. This is what you do and what you get to contact the media. I sent a copy of this book to every media outlet that exists that you can think of. CNN, BET, every media outlet that you can conceive of will send a copy of this book. Yet you haven't heard any of these arguments, you haven't heard any of these statements, and you won't, because of corruption in the American media. I just gave you an example. This Bryce Williams was an actor promoting homosexual. And instead of the media referencing the fact that he was an actor promoting homosexual, they referenced him as a black terrorist. Well, that's because the media is corrupt. And part of my presentation is that the media is corrupt. So back to the reference to Sodom and Egypt. Back to the reference to the nation, once a great nation, that became sodomy. You know, when I was researching this, I couldn't really figure out exactly where and how America came to be in this position. So I researched Israel and its geopolitical standards in terms of this homosexual issue, and I was stunned. In 2012, they sponsored the International Homosexual and Transgender events worldwide, Israel. And in that regard, I started the research to see when is it that this happened to Israel. Do you know that Israel in 1963, I didn't know, but I researched things, started this change in their ideology to such an extent that in 1983, Israel was officially and formally a homosexual state. I was astonished. I didn't know, but I'm informing you that that's where Israel is. They don't call it sodomy, they call it buggery, but it's the same thing. So while these Christian groups are sending tours over by day, the same streets that the Christian tours are using in the daytime are being utilized by the flamboyant homosexual community in Israel by night. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in serious trouble. Let me give you an idea of the context of how I present this to you. My last name is Alston. If you go into Delaware, you'll inevitably at some point cross Alston's branch. It's on the major highway. It is a road marker of my family name in connection to slavery. It's a first-generation slave name. I may not appear Swedish to you, but I am. And let me explain who I am and what you're seeing, because what you think you're saying you may not be. My name is EShed. EShed is a first-generation male Jewish name. I know I appear to be a Muslim. I'm not. I'm a Christian prophet. And if you research the Bible, you'd understand that the Christian prophets wore their heads covered. But that's neither here nor there. Part of my presentation is that we, as Americans, have to be one unified thing, because our enemies look at us as one unified thing when they talk about destroying us. They don't differentiate between color. They just concerned that we're Americans, and that's good enough to kill us. Because if our enemies can collectively look at us as one thing, then why can't we? So I don't use the term African American. I'm not an African American. I was born in Botswana. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, Kings County Hospital. I use the term Amero-African. I'm an American of African descent. And if we are all from whatever culture, then we are Amero-Italian and Amero-Irish and Amero-African, but the American is what comes first. And so that's one of the things that I stress. I just wanted to make that clear. But right now, I'm banned from a land-grant college. I'm banned from Delaware State University by Judge Terry Vaughn, the same name on the Smyrna Correctional Institution. Terry Vaughn, that was his father. And Judge Terry Vaughn has banned me from Delaware State for 6 years to prevent me from building a working prototype of Shepherd to compete with Solyndra. Because after all, we can't have me at Delaware State building a working prototype when you're taking the 6 years to steal the idea. That probably wouldn't work too well. And as a result of this judge's racist policies, he was promoted to the next Delaware Supreme Court Justice, Justice Terry Vaughn. This is corruption, racism, and it is why we have come to be where we are. Under this administration, we have had more killings of black people than any administration in the last 20 years. How is it that the legacy of Barack Hussein Obama is not black culture, but rather the homosexual agenda? So when we look at Barack Hussein Obama's legacy, it was referenced 5 years ago in my book. So I'm here to sell my book, not because it's a new book. I'm here to sell my book because it's a 6-year-old book that identifies accurately how we became the Obama nation. They said A and the O, Alpha and Omega. They said the A and the O, the beginning and the end. They said the beginning and the end. But if they use the term abomination as the A term, is it not justifiable to say that the abomination of sodomy and of disrespect for God's word is the O term in these last days? One question I raise, I think it's a reasonable question. What perspective would we have as a Christian man that we would have a presentation whereas the White House is lit up in the rainbow colors? What was the purpose of that, Barack Hussein Obama? What were you celebrating? Were you celebrating your Christian ethic? Were you celebrating the way that God used the rainbow when in Genesis, when he was showing that the flood was over and the rainbow was a sign of the new covenant? What is the use of this connection to the White House and the rainbow, unless it has something to do with what occurred the day before, which was the U.S. Supreme Court turning America into Sodom America? So part of what I'm saying to you, audience, is that we're in serious trouble. And no book told the story with more clarity 6 years ago than the book, The Lamb's Book of Life, the book I wrote. And I'd like you to buy my book, not because it's accurate now, it is accurate now, but because it's been accurate over the last 6 years in writing. So I need you to take 3 things out of this. One, that I'm banned from Delaware State University, and I'm a first-generation slave stock. The mandate for law was for federal authority. This is a state court judge. And what I'm submitting to you is that but for the fraud and but for the corruption, I wouldn't be banned from Delaware State University. Now, I'd also like to add that in my struggles to end the oppression involved with this racist judge, Terry Vaughn, I have gotten no help whatsoever from any Christian organization, any Christian's perspectives, ministers or otherwise. The only support I've gotten as a Christian has come from brothers and sisters from the Nation of Islam. I just wanted to make that clear. So although you would expect my Christian brothers and sisters would give me support, they don't. I've got more support from the Nation of Islam than anywhere else. So that's my presentation. That's what I'm here to sell. The fact that we are a fallen nation, the fact that the perspectives on how we got here was easily defined. This is my rather raggedy Bible, I will admit. But what I submit to you is when your Bible is raggedy like this, your life won't be. Better to have a raggedy Bible than a raggedy life. Right now, there's no way that Barack Hussein Obama can assert himself to be a Christian man. Remember what Gruber said when they sold us the Affordable Care Act. He said, we can sell this to the American people because they're stupid. I say to you, American people, if you don't understand what I'm saying, and if what I'm saying completely was lost to you, then maybe perhaps for some of you, he was right. Thank you. Thank you for listening and for entertaining my presentation. Thank you for your consideration for not only what I published in the past time, but what I'm introducing to you now. God is an unchanging force, and in terms of his being an unchanging force, his focus is always on his creation. But the homosexual agenda is not part of his creation. The idea that the homosexuals are presenting us a creation scenario is based on one word, or should I say two words. And the two words are normal and natural. Normal and natural. It is normal and natural for procreation to be between a man and a woman. It is normal and natural for a hog, a frog, and a dog, a rat, a bat, and a cat. If a hog, a frog, and a dog, a rat, and a bat, and a cat have that lack of sophistication than we do as humans, and they understand what nature is, how is it that this nation has lost its way to such an extent that we now light the White House up in rainbow colors in celebration of a homosexual victory? Thank you for listening and for watching. I appreciate your attention. My book is out there. It's a 6-year-old book, and I would like you to buy the book. The book is The Lamb's Book of Life. It tells the perspective of the prophet from 2009 to 2015. The book was written 6 years ago, and I submit to you that the purpose of a book on prophecy that is new is probably less valuable than a book on prophecy that is old.